Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this week's lecture. We're going to take a little bit of a break from our traditional format that we use to go over some of the material, and we're going to have a more hands-on approach this week. If you notice, the material that we're discussing is creating illustrations, specifically using those to present our information in a more useful way. Obviously, there's more than one way to present information. For what we've been doing originally, we've been talking about utilizing our writing for the purpose of conveying information, but also conveying it in a certain way. And as you'll find, people generally find it more appealing when you present information in the form of an actual illustration, like a table, graph, or something like that. It's more eye-catching and it's easier to understand. It also is really difficult if you're trying to display a series of numbers in traditional essay format. There's a lot of information going on, and how do you know if the person on the other end is actually absorbing that particular material? A couple of things that we'll go over are creating tables and different graphs, as well as process flow charts for the purpose of actually communicating specific material. Now, before you go forward any further, what I do recommend is actually logging into Blackboard and downloading the PDF that I just posted in our new learning module here for Chapter 7, which is going to be labeled Illustration Exercises. It'll be in the module for this week, and you're going to use that just to kind of follow along. Obviously, I'm screen sharing Microsoft Excel at this point, so you'll be able to see the work that I do and follow along. But I can only share one thing at a time, so you won't be able to see the exercises on my screen. So make sure that you have that handy so you know what it is that we're doing and can follow along. The idea here is that at the very least you should be able to create some basic charts and graphs and those types of things so you can use in your own work going forward. So hopefully we can give you a little bit of skills in those particular areas. Now this is going to be really basic for the most part, so we're not going to go into any kind of great detail specifically, but I'm just trying to make sure that we all have some type of base knowledge to kind of work with going forward. So the first thing you can see here is from the practice exercise sheet that I've created for you is we have a series of exercises that we'll get through. The first of which is going to be surrounding creating a table in Microsoft Excel. So I have Excel open. If you don't have Excel, you'll want to access the computer that does. It's very easy to use, very much considered to be an industry standard, although you can use different spreadsheet programs or spreadsheet software, although that may not be identical, obviously, to what I'm doing as of right now. So that may be somewhat of an issue if you're using, numbers in Apple or a different type of product. So the first thing we have here is we have a series of information. We have 2011 and 2012 product sales, and we're given sales figures for every month. So it's our job to present this information in a manner that's very, very easy to read, frankly. Now, we don't have to necessarily write out a long paragraph full of each of the months and what their sales figures is. There's a much easier way to convey the information that the reader can actually grasp what we're trying to communicate. So the first thing that we're going to do here is create our table. And we want to have obviously headings for each of the months on here first. You'll notice that as I type these in every cell, and you'll want to do the same on your end, that I'm leaving a little bit of space at the beginning, or on the top I should say. And the reason for that is you want to leave a little bit of space so we can make any changes we need to, add additional headings if we want to, and all those different types of things as well. So always leave yourself a little bit of space so you can do some editing afterwards. Don't necessarily worry about the width of the columns at this point. Notice that September is a little cut off, obviously, because the column is not wide enough. We'll change those things later on. We just want to get some words in the cells at this point so we can make those changes. Next thing you're going to want to do is go ahead and key in the sales figures for each particular month. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Tabbing over works better instead of hitting the enter key. If you hit enter, notice it takes you to the original cell for the row below that. If you hit tab, it'll continue to take you all the way over to the right, much as you're seeing on my screen right here. So feel free and enter everything in as I do. Now what you can do, and the reason I didn't, you may be asking why I'm not putting dollar signs and commas and decimals and all those different types of things, is I can key in just the numerical data much easier, and then I can actually highlight the entire area and go over here to this little dollar sign, and it will actually change everything over to an accounting format, essentially, which adds the $, comma, and the decimals. Now notice that we don't necessarily have anything after the decimal point. So one of the things that you can do is, if you look up here where my cursor is, you can actually decrease the indent. So in this case, we're taking off 1 0, and if I hit that again, it takes off that last 0. Obviously, if you had some type of figure after the decimal point, you probably want to include that. Maybe you don't, but at the very least, we can have that removed. And I just noticed here that October is missing 1 0. That makes a big difference. Okay, so we have that all ready to go. So already we're starting to look like we have at least some type of information there. It's organized somewhat neatly. Now we're going to want to go ahead and make some changes to ultimately how it looks. So the first thing we can do is we obviously want our headings to stand out a little bit, right? We don't like that it blends together with the text so much. We want it to kind of pop a little bit. So you can go ahead and put that in bold. One of the two ways to do that, of course, is you can scroll up here. You see my cursor and hit this bold icon. And there you go. You can also hit Control B on your keyboard there, and that will do ultimately the same thing. Now that we have kind of an idea on roughly how much space we're going to take up, because notice when the word is bolden, it takes up more space, we can actually mess with the column width here. Now you can click on, see how my cursor looks a little different right now. You can click here and then drag to where it's more in line, or you can just double click on, for example, the line between my C and D columns, and that will automatically format it based upon what's in that particular column. And so much easier way than worrying about exactly how much space to allocate to individual column. It just depends upon what's in the cells. Okay. Next thing we want to do is we want to center it. It's not so much of an issue for the columns that have more text in there because there's not enough space to really tell. But you notice like May, June, and July, they're obviously left-hand justified there. So we want them to all look pretty similar. So we can go ahead and center those there. That way there's a uniform and consistent look across the whole table here. Next thing we want to do is give this guy an actual heading, right? So we want to give it a title. In this case, we can just go ahead and title it 2011 and 2012 product sales. Now, of course, we need to center it. Easiest way to do that is we can make this entire area one cell. And so if you highlight this entire area right above where it's from January here to December over here, we can actually what's called merge and center that. And if you hit this button right here, that's exactly what that's going to do. Basically combines those cells into one actual cell. So when I click on this, it's basically treating it as it were one cell. So I can edit everything in here as it were one actual cell. So I can do things like go ahead and change it to bold. I can even increase the typeface a little bit so it stands out a little more. And then there you go. And so already starting to look a little bit more presentable. Next thing you can do is give it some borders. Borders are a great way of allowing readers to be able to distinguish between certain areas of a table. So the way I can do that is obviously highlight all of the entire table I have here, and I go up here to this particular area. If you click this arrow that's facing downward, it'll open up a series of options for you can choose from. You can do things like just establishing all borders, in which case everything on the or in that highlighted area will have a border, all the cells will. If you need to go back, you just click this area, highlight everything, and you go ahead and select the option for no borders, and it'll take everything off. Or we can, maybe we just want to do one large border for the top here and then leave it at that. So you have one thick border and then nothing down here. There's a lot of different things that you can do depending upon how you want to present the material. You can do that and then maybe just have smaller borders here. Let me change this back here real quick. So a lot of different things you can do here. Obviously, I encourage you to play around with it a little bit and see what you like. I do encourage you, don't necessarily take it too far. Just because technology allows us to do a lot of different neat things, it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to. And you don't want to detract from what you're trying to present. You don't want anybody necessarily going on and on about the actual layout. You want them actually looking at the material. That's kind of what the purpose is. So don't change anything too drastically. But obviously, it's a little fun to go ahead and play around with it and kind of make some changes and that sort of thing. So this is an example of an actual table that you can go ahead and copy paste or drag into a Word document, and does a great job of presenting the information in a very, very neat and succinct way as well. So let's move on and take this information and create a line chart out of it. The first thing that we need to do is we actually need to highlight the information that we want to turn into a chart. So most people will go ahead and highlight the actual numerical data. What you want to do is also highlight, in addition to the numerical data, the months, because obviously this sales figure is tied to January and this sales figure is tied to February, so on and so forth. And that's what you want to tell the computer program, is that those numbers are tied to those months. Otherwise it's going to create a graph with only sales figures and you're going to have no basis for comparison or not know what months they correspond to. So I've gone ahead and highlighted the area that I want to turn into a actual chart. Next thing you want to do is click Insert, and you have a couple of different options in this area of your screen right here. And what we're going to select is Line. And once again, we have a lot of different options. One thing I do recommend is never do 3D charts. They may look really cool, but it's really difficult to see the information once they're created. If you don't believe me, try selecting it and kind of see what happens. So it doesn't look very good. Stick to the traditional 2D charts. Those look much better, more commonly used. You won't run into any issues there. So let's select the basic 3D or 2D line chart here, which I just did, and automatically a chart will pop up, and this automatically syncs the area in the chart with the months below that. It'll automatically create different values right here on the side, which is great, so you kind of have some frame of reference on, okay, where's the line in comparison to that particular area. And then you have a legend over here which explains to you what does one line mean. Obviously isn't so important if you only have one particular line, right? Because people are going to automatically assume what that means. But if you ever get into presenting more than one of something, let's say if you have 4 or 5 companies and you're comparing their sales over a certain period, you are going to want to distinguish between, okay, red is Dell, green is Apple, blue is HP, and all those different things. So you can also do a lot of different things with the chart itself. You can play around with ultimately the look of it, the layout, how the font, the type of the font, a lot of different things. You have a lot of different resources or options at your disposal here to ultimately change things. One of the things that I always like to do is change the color of that particular line, because it always defaults to that really funky blue color, which I never really like. And to do that, just double click on the line, go here to line color. You can select solid, and then you can change the line to whatever color you would ultimately like it to be. In this case, I'll go with the traditional black color here. And then you can change the size of it if you want to make it a little larger. If you want to change the series here, you want to give it an actual name, all you have to do is right click, go to select data right here. And on this screen, you're going to see a couple of options here, but if you see Series 1, this is the name that you're giving to that line on your chart there. And if you edit it, you can change that to whatever you want. So in my case, I'll change it to sales figures. Okay, and there we go. Automatically it went ahead and changed what's on the legend of my particular chart. Notice it also changed the heading of the chart. You can click in this box. It's just a text box. And then you can change what's in here as well. You can change the font, if it's bold or not, all those different things. So you have a lot of different resources to make changes here, but this is an example of a really basic line chart here that we've gone ahead and created. All right, if you need any additional info on that, feel free and rewind and go through it again. I do apologize if I brushed over anything, but I tried to obviously go slowly to make sure that you had everything you needed to get going. So let's move on to exercise C. We already went through A, obviously creating the table. B was creating a line chart from that information. Let's go on to exercise C, which is specifically related to market share. So I'm going to scroll down here in Excel and give us some more space to work in. And exercise C is very similar, only that we're dealing with percentages, specifically percentages of market share in the U.S. PC industry or personal computing industry. So we have a number of different market shares. The first thing that we have to do is create a table in Excel so we can use to create our pie chart, which is, of course, exercise D. So let's go ahead and put that information in there real quick. The first thing I'm going to do is actually create our headings for the companies that we're working with here. let me start a little lower. So we have HP, Dell, Acer, Apple, Toshiba, and then the other category. And now we want to go ahead and enter in the information we're working with here. So I usually enter everything in decimal forms first, and then I change them to percentages just because Microsoft Excel sometimes gets a little finicky if you don't do it that way when you're trying to multiply cells together. So here we go, and then I'm going to go ahead and highlight this area and click this percentage button to change everything to percentages. It defaults to not including a decimal point. So like we did last time, you can actually increase the indentation or increase the decimal and add that last decimal back in there since we don't want to necessarily round. Next thing I can do is I can add a header here. So I want to put market share for this guy. Maybe I want to double click on this line here so it's formatted correctly. And then like last time, I can create an overall header for the entire table. So I can put something along the lines of US PC industry market share. Well, that kind of sounds a little redundant. Let me just put US PC industry. And then I do want to go ahead and merge and center these so it's all one cell. It's much easier to edit if it's just one cell. And then we can go ahead and play around with the formatting and the text and everything. Let's say I want to make this a little bigger so it stands out. Maybe I want to bold. I'll bold this one too. And then we can go ahead and change the actual configuration with borders. So there we go. And so we just successfully created a basic, obviously, table in Microsoft Excel presenting some of the information that we obviously want to convey to people actually looking at whatever it is that we're presenting. So we have that there. So let's take this and let's create a pie chart from it. Similar to how we did in exercise B where we created that line chart, we're going to select the area that we want to create a chart with. So we have to actually select the headings as well because it's going to tell Microsoft Excel ultimately which percentage corresponds to which particular company. Next thing we're going to do is go back up to Insert. And you notice there's an option for pie chart. So select that drop down box and you have a couple of different options here. Let's go with a basic 2D pie chart. You can also utilize this exploded pie chart, which is great if you're trying to highlight a certain area. In our case, we're not really trying to highlight any area. We're just trying to show the percentages of each particular company as they compare to the entire PC market. So once I select that here, we're instantly given an actual pie chart that breaks up each of these companies in certain areas. You know, this is a great way to present information, specifically because you don't have to present the actual percentages. I can just see what portion HP has and infer roughly what percentage they have. It's probably a little more than 25% based upon the actual chart here. Same thing with Dell. Dell, it looks like, is roughly about 50 based upon how much of a position they have out of this pie chart. So although we don't have to communicate the percentages, we're giving our readers a good depiction over how large of a market share this company has out of the entire whole. Now, if you want to include the percentages, all you have to do is right-click on the chart, as I just did, and click Add Data Labels. And once you click on that, it's going to go ahead and add those percentages in there if it's something that you want to include. You can do a number of different things to the actual pie chart on top of that as well. Double clicking on it will bring up some options for you. You can put borders on it, you can fill certain areas, you can even change the colors of different areas. Obviously, Microsoft Excel doesn't automatically produce the most visually appealing colors, but you have a number of different options that you can choose from. Notice up here you have different chart tools as well. So you can select on this and change kind of the configuration of the charts. Maybe you want to go with something like that. Makes it stand out a little more. Point being, you have a number of different options at your disposal. So toy around with this, kind of see what you like, what looks good, what doesn't look very good. That's the best way to find out if something doesn't look right. Just start clicking on different buttons and seeing ultimately what they do. That's how a lot of people learn best. So, but congratulations, you just successfully created a pie chart in Microsoft Excel. All right, the last thing that we're going to do here obviously is exercise E, which we're going to create a decision tree And in this exercise, we're creating a decision tree to help a hiring manager evaluate a job applicant. Decision trees are great for a series of sequential events, specifically if you're trying to outline something in a very easy to read fashion, so that you want to make sure that the person that's looking at your work is going to understand what they need to do, and if they don't, they're going to it's going to be on them pretty much. So you don't want to necessarily leave it up to their interpretation. If you look at your PDF file with exercise E, I've already outlined some of the things that we're going to go ahead and do. And those are listed under exercise E, items 1 through 6. But notice that I've listed each of these things in numerical form, indicating that there's a certain sequence of events specifically. And a lot of times this will work in terms of how it's being presented. But if we wanted to illustrate this in a much easier to read fashion, we can use an actual decision tree to illustrate the idea much more successfully. And this is going to sound a lot simpler than you think. It's not a very difficult thing to do, although it does take a little bit of work, but I'm going to show you a basic way to create your own decision tree. One thing I will tell you is a lot of software programs are designed to do this very thing. So you can get into much more kind of intricate and complex things if you're utilizing a software, and there's different ways you can do it. I'm going to teach you a very basic approach that is very easy to use, and you can plug and play real quick. It's not going to take a whole lot of researching and doing all those different types of things. So without that, or with that said, let's go ahead and get started here. So let's create our decision tree here to help this hiring manager evaluate a job applicant. The first thing that we want to do is we want to start putting text boxes here. Text boxes are great for establishing certain areas that we can apply text to, and then we can kind of move that around based upon what we want to do. So if you click up here on Insert, you're going to have a couple of options that actually come up on your screen. Now, if you follow my cursor, we're going to go all the way over here to where it says text box. And then once we select that, it's going to give us a couple options. There are a number of different text boxes that you can choose from. We're going to go with the simple format just to keep everything pretty basic. And then we can actually type our text in this particular box here. So let's start with the first thing that we have here. Our first step is asking if the applicant has the availability to work for that time period. So let's go ahead and enter that in here. Let me make sure I can spell everything correctly. Perfect. And we're not going to necessarily worry about formatting and all those different types of things. You can do that kind of on your own and use some of the skills we've been talking about over the course of the semester here. We're going to go ahead and move this over here. And so we have our first one that's already done. And so obviously with a decision tree, you're trying to give the reader an idea on what to do. So we have to give them some decisions. So there's one of two things is going to happen. Either it's going to be a yes or a no, of course. So let's say, for example, if it's a yes, we want to create a new box here. And if it's a yes, they're going to scroll down to their next option, which is, does the applicant meet the minimum experience requirements? And I'm going to put all these boxes on here first, and then we're going to go ahead and edit them at one time just so we make sure that we're efficient and not having to do things more than once. And if you wanted to be really fancy too, you can just go ahead and click on one of those boxes, hit Control-C to copy, and then hit Control-V, and then you'll actually go ahead and just recreate them like that. Much easier to do, much quicker. Don't have to, but if you're trying to be more efficient, you can certainly do that. Okay, got that one. I'm going to create one more. And we have our fifth box here. Notice I'm not necessarily worrying about where they're placed. I'm just kind of putting in the general area that they're going to go once I create my decision tree. Just make sure we highlight that. You may be wondering what a Wonderlic test and behavioral interviews are. Don't necessarily worry about that. That's not the point of the exercise. I'm just trying to get you used to seeing how you can create a actual text box here. So we have everything down here that we are going to be using. We can obviously move these around where we want and all those different types of things as well. Most softwares usually will allow you, while this one's not doing it, will tell you when you're kind of in line with certain areas. That way you don't have to necessarily wonder if you're, obviously running parallel with something, or if how far are you away from it. We'll just kind of have to use our, kind of rough estimate, so to speak. But usually a lot of different software will tell you when you're the same width apart from each of the boxes, so it has the same look to it, although I don't see that kind of coming up in here. But we do need to go ahead and add some arrows obviously first, because this is a decision tree, so we're trying to show not only a sequential steps obviously, but where to go after you complete the step above it. So what we can do is go once again to insert here, and you're going to see that we have some shapes. So click on shapes, and we're specifically going to be looking at these arrows right here. Arrows are a great way obviously to show what to do after you go to one particular event. So let's have an arrow pointing down here, and there you go. Now we can drag this a little bit, of course, if we want to put it somewhere else. Remove it over here to the right a little bit just so it's centered. And then what you can do is go ahead and copy, and then paste that, so we can use that as well. And that is a great way also to find out roughly if your boxes are actually the same width apart. And notice here that I'm able to move a little quicker, because what I've done is just gone ahead and copied that once, and then I'm continuing to hit Control V, which is just a fast way to go ahead and paste something. And last one. There we go. Okay. So we have all of our arrows here. Let me change this real quick, because this is just going to bug me if it's not exactly right. There we go. All right, so I have all our arrows here pointing down. Now we do have to obviously have some arrows that indicate if we don't move on, right? Because if the applicant has the availability, right, for a time to work at the time required, it can be a yes or a no. And if it's a yes, we obviously want to move that person further along. And obviously if they don't meet the next one, like the minimum experience requirements, they essentially get siphoned out of that applicant pool. But if they continue to pass the requirements, they move all the way down to that next particular process here. But if they don't, there has to be something that we can do to get them out of there. So one of the things we can do is you'll want to create one more last text box here for what happens if they don't move on. So let's put that over here. And then if they don't, for any reason, move on in the application process, we can say send out formal denial thank you letter. It sounds kind of funny, formal denial thank you letter, denying and saying thank you at the same time. Obviously this is the type of letter that you receive from a company that does not move you on in the hiring process. Hey, thank you so much for applying. We encourage you to do it going forward. Unfortunately, your experience didn't match the qualifications and what we were looking for. Blah, yada, yada, so on and so forth. So we want to send that letter, obviously, to thank people for applying, because we want them to feel appreciated. We want them to apply again if they're qualified, but they just weren't in this particular case. So now we need to go ahead and set some arrows up for this particular area of the decision tree. So we'll go ahead and do that here. I'm going to go ahead and have one arrow starting in this box and going all the way over here. And I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that particular arrow here, because I'm going to use it for all of these other areas as well. So I'll do the same here. Same here. And here. And there, and then one more, although this next one we're not necessarily going to need for it to be so long. So what I can do is then drag that back over here. And then there we go. And now we have to have obviously one last arrow, which just kind of shows the linkage between everything. So going all the way down here to this particular box. And if you really wanted to, you can go through and change all these to make sure that they touch. Okay, kind of like so. All right. So there we go. Now we want to give the reader an idea on what to do in certain situations here. So there's a number of different ways that you can actually do this. Usually in Microsoft Word, it will allow you, if you wanted to type some text, if you double click on the area that you want to go ahead and put text in, it should take you to that particular area. And so this would be obviously a no. Same thing here. Oops. Let's see if we can go down one more. Oh, I'll put it right there. And so what this basically means is when asking the question, if the result is a no, then the person that's basically looking at this decision chart would follow this process over and then send out that formal denial thanking them for actually applying. If for any reason, let's say for example, they have the availability, then we obviously want that to be a yes, and we want them to continue to move down in this area. So we want them to continue to go on to get evaluated for experience. We want them to be evaluated based upon their educational requirements. Want them to obviously evaluate it based upon their skills, want them to go through the Wonderlic, and then moving on and so forth. So obviously this is a great way to illustrate the process for something, not just for the hiring process per se, but anything that has a number or series of steps. This is great for troubleshooting. Obviously a lot of companies use this. They'll post documents similar to these actually on websites. So you can troubleshoot and it will say, did this work? Yes, in that case you're done. No, then move on to this step over here. So once again, great way for illustrating a lot of different steps to a process and helping someone come to a particular decision. It only took us about 10 minutes to set that up, and in my opinion it actually lays everything out much more simply and easier for me to understand versus going through a series of bulleted lists and figuring out if they have each particular thing. So hopefully you found that useful. In terms of exercises, what we'll be doing is something very similar to that. So if you need to clarify, if you need a refresher, feel free and review the video again if I went over any of the steps too quickly for you. So thank you for joining and have a great week.